Matthew had an extraordinary charisma. I think having him as my first love, even if we break up, there will be no regret. So, I chased Matthew relentlessly. He was moved by my pursuit and set 3 conditions: no marriage, just dating, and we would break up after graduation. I gladly agreed. We were together for 3 years, playing out our love story to the fullest. On graduation day, I took the initiative to suggest breaking up, but he went back on his word. I was stunned. Didn't we agree? We said we'd break up after graduation. I clearly remember that. At the very end of that day, we had a falling out. Matthew lowered his once proud head and laughed self-deprecatingly. Juliet, you better pray that we never cross paths again. From then on, I avoided him. However, with a gentle flick of God's finger, the world became small, and sooner or later, 2 people were bound to meet again. Chapter 1. Matthew and I silently adhered to an unspoken rule. We were only a campus couple. Once we were out of school, for instance, during holidays, we would return to our respective homes and not contact each other. During those days of no contact, he was the famous young Master Matthew of City A, and I was the unnoticed Juliet of City C. We didn't text, didn't call, didn't inquire about each other's whereabouts, as though we were still single. I thought this niche mode of interaction would last until our graduation breakup. But that summer of sophomore year was especially long, lasting a full 80 days. Before leaving school, Matthew asked me, "Will you miss me?" I snuggled up to him and coquettishly replied, I'll miss you so much." He pulled me into his arms and kissed my forehead, without saying something foolish like, "If you miss me, contact me." I always admired this rational side of Matthew. His family was of high status, and his future partner would surely come from the same background. We both knew there was no future for us. The reason we were dating was probably just to experience a pure campus romance, and I happened to fit Matthew's taste for a girlfriend. On campus, Matthew was my boyfriend. Outside school, when he became young Master Matthew, he didn't want me to interfere with his life. I complied with his wishes, silently cooperating, never overstepping the boundaries. At that time, I never expected that Matthew would be the one to break this rule. The summer vacation was too long, and he sent me a message saying he was returning to school early, a whole month before our agreed time. I was surprised when I received the message and teasingly asked him, "Why are you coming back early? Did you miss me?" He didn't reply to that message. However, from then on, whenever there was a long holiday, Matthew would ask me, "Do you want to travel together?" Most of the time, I would agree with delight. We traveled to many cities, watched the stars in the desert, and the sunset on an island. When I admired the beautiful scenery, I was often very serious, which made me easily startled by Matthew's sudden kisses. He loved holding my face, pressing down to kiss me, a very domineering gesture. In terms of intimacy, Matthew liked to take the lead, making me bear the brunt. However, whenever it came to critical moments, I would ruin the mood by calling for a stop. With desire in his eyes and his Adam's apple moving up and down, Matthew would remain silent, only raising an eyebrow and asking in confusion, "What's wrong?" My answer was always the same, "I don't want to." Despite the raging desire, his body sweating lightly, he would always manage to restrain himself when I called for a stop, heading to the bathroom for a cold shower, and then returning to hold me purely for sleep. After rejecting him many times, Matthew seemed to have guessed part of my thoughts. Whenever there was a hint of escalation, without me having to stop him, he would get up on his own to take a cold shower. The only exception was once. That day, he saw a message from a friend of mine and asked, "Who is this person?" I didn't hide it from him, "It's a friend from City C." He didn't say anything at that moment, but by the evening, his attitude turned firm. I resisted. He grabbed my wrist and pinned it to the headboard, continuing anyway. I tried to avoid his kiss and emphasized, "Matthew, I don't want to." "Why not?" he asked. "Is it because of that friend from City C?" A person who was usually so proud could turn into a mad dog when jealous. Impossible to calm down. I never made it clear. But Matthew must have understood that I didn't want to take things to the final step because I knew he wouldn't be the one to stay with me in the end. I didn't want our bond to become too deep. Matthew was a gentleman, understanding my thoughts, never pushing me into something I wasn't ready for. However, from then on, each time we grew close again, it felt as if he was testing me, and it became quite exhausting. Chapter 2. In the second semester of our junior year, the day we had agreed to break up was fast approaching. Just thinking about ending this relationship made me feel reluctant. To avoid future pain, I began preparing myself psychologically, doing the mental work of letting go. That year, Matthew arranged for us to travel to the UK. On the second day after we arrived in Kent, I was still adjusting to the time difference in my sleep when a group of people barged into the hotel room. I was forcefully put into a wedding dress, made up to perfection as a bride, and then escorted to a carriage outside the hotel. I had no idea when Matthew had arranged all of this. We held a wedding at Canterbury Cathedral, officiated by a priest himself. There were no guests. It was just the two of us. A wedding that wasn't recognized by anyone. It wasn't until we exchanged rings that I finally understood why he had asked me for a ring as this year's birthday gift. It was only so that I could have a ring to exchange at that moment. This was an invalid wedding. We both knew that. But that night, as Matthew was breathing heavily and about to take a cold shower, I stopped him. I pushed him onto the bed and kissed him fiercely. He trembled, his voice breaking as he called my name, Juliet. I pouted. It's our wedding night. Matthew, don't be so unromantic. It didn't matter anymore. I thought. Who cares about the future? Just for today. I, Juliet, am his Matthew's bride. I allowed myself to indulge. Just this once. At the time, I thought it would be just once, but it ended up being many times. Some principles, once broken, are like no longer having a stance to uphold. They can only be broken again and again, retreating step by step. Both Matthew and I had lost control, and the car couldn't be stopped. I told myself that I would treat this as a last indulgence, leaving a little madness, so that I wouldn't regret taking Matthew for myself. I wasn't sure when Matthew would bring up the breakup. After all, our original agreement was to just date, not get married, and break up after graduation. There was no set day. I waited in torment for a while, but he never spoke up. The flight back to City C was already booked, and I didn't have time to drag things out any longer. Matthew and I needed a formal goodbye. I took the initiative to arrange a meeting with him at a relatively quiet restaurant near the school and brought up the topic of breaking up. I had imagined Matthew's reaction. I thought he would stay true to his usual style, accepting it calmly, and then say goodbye in a gentlemanly manner. What I didn't expect was that he looked at me quietly and said, "No." I didn't understand at first and asked dumbfounded, "What do you mean, no?" He gazed deeply into my eyes and said, "Juliet, I don't want to break up." Chapter 3. My mind suddenly became chaotic. Matthew was never the type to go back on his word. He always kept his promises and followed through with everything he said. So, I had always firmly believed that the breakup was a done deal. I never expected he would change his mind. When did he change his mind? I hadn't noticed it at all. I felt a bit flustered inside, because I had never thought of continuing with Matthew. The agreement to break up after graduation seemed like a mutually agreeable decision. Matthew's sudden change of heart caught me completely off guard. I couldn't find the words to respond, and just stared at him in disbelief. My reaction was probably far from what he had expected. His tone, unusually laced with urgency, said, "I know what you're worried about, Juliet. Give me 5 years. In 5 years, I promise, no one from the Matthew family will interfere with my marriage. At that time, we'll hold another wedding, invite family and friends to witness it, and have a marriage certificate stamped by the Civil Affairs Bureau, publicly declaring to the world that we belong to each other." "Juliet," he asked me, "what do you say?" Faced with his earnest question, I felt guilty, avoiding his gaze, and forced myself to mumble, "But we agreed, didn't we? We said we'd break up after graduation." Matthew clearly froze for a moment, asking unconsciously, "What?" At this point, if I didn't make myself clear, I feared there would be misunderstandings. I took a deep breath and spoke plainly. "I want to break up." Matthew's gaze shot at me, so sharp it felt almost physical, and it hurt. He casually placed his arms on the table, staring at me directly. his whole presence exuding an intimidating aura. Why? The question was tinged with a faint coldness, as if, rather than being confused, he actually wanted to hear me say it aloud. I had never felt this kind of pressure from Matthew. With a mindset to cut things off cleanly, I spilled out everything I had been thinking. Because we're not a match. I have no big ambitions. I just want to eat, drink, and live a peaceful life. I don't want to be bullied because of our different social statuses, and I don't want to deal with complicated relationships. If I marry you, all of that is inevitable. So, I never really thought about continuing this relationship. By the end of my words, my voice had dropped. I suddenly realized, compared to Matthew, I seemed cruel. He had carefully planned our future, while I was calculating every gain and loss. It was as though, on the battlefield we shared, he was determined to fight for me. But I had already prepared to escape the battlefield, and I wasn't planning to look back. I've said everything I needed to, I said hurriedly, standing up in a rush to escape, and quickly added, I'm leaving. Take care of yourself. I turned around, but my arm was grabbed, like an iron clamp, stubbornly not letting go. I panicked and turned back. Matthew was sitting at the table, looking up at me. A man who was always so proud, now seemed drenched in rain, emanating an icy coldness. He asked, if you never thought about having a future with me, why did you give yourself to me? I froze, shaking off his hand and pretending to be casual. I didn't think you'd care about that. I honestly don't care as much. He seemed to be stung, his eyes flickering with broken emotion. Then, he pulled a self-deprecating smile, let go of me, and stood up from his chair. His tall figure instantly cast a shadow over me. He stood straight, unwilling to bend, only lowering his eyelids and casting a downward gaze. Staring at me, Juliet, you'd better pray we never meet again, or else, I don't know what I might do. I showed no expression on the outside, but my palms were sweating. I felt a bit of regret. I shouldn't have provoked him. That day, I fled the restaurant in a panic, never looking back, and returned to City C. From then on, even when traveling, I made sure to avoid City A. I thought I would never see Matthew again in my life, but, in the end, man's plans are no match for fate. Chapter 4. My cousin married into a wealthy family and invited me to the wedding. The wedding was held in City A, and once I found out the location, I flatly declined the invitation. However, the groom's family had a strict policy for selecting which guests from the bride's side could attend, and they singled me out as the only one deemed worthy to appear. In other words, at my cousin's wedding, her parents weren't allowed to attend. Among family and friends, besides me, only a few bridesmaids were permitted to witness the ceremony. My cousin's mother, my aunt, personally came to ask me, hoping that as the only member from the bride's side, I could support my cousin at the wedding. I was forced to take on this ridiculous responsibility. We were arranged to stay at a luxurious hotel. The next day, my cousin would be married right from the hotel. The night before the wedding, a young girl added my cousin on WeChat and sent her more than 10 photos of herself intimately interacting with the groom, along with a video, about 30 kilometers away. At a villa, there was a single-ending party going on. Men and women, dressed in revealing outfits, were enjoying themselves to the fullest. In the video, the flirtatious young girl was kissing the groom sweetly on the lips. My cousin calmly turned off the phone and said to me and the other 6 bridesmaids, let's go join the party. I never thought I would see Matthew again. After all, City A was so big. I thought, what are the odds? After 4 years, the first time I come back to City A, I would run into him by sheer coincidence. But fate, as it often does, loves to play tricks. My cousin was there to establish her dominance. Without hesitation, she slapped the young girl across the face. The young girl wasn't happy and tried to find the groom for support, but she realized that he was just smiling at the situation, showing no intention of defending her. The groom's name was Wu, Mario Wu. What the young girl didn't know was that my cousin had made an agreement with Mario before their marriage. No matter how much Mario flirted outside, my cousin could choose to ignore it. But there was one condition: if any of the girls from outside came to provoke her, she was free to handle it herself, and Mario wasn't allowed to interfere. The young girl misjudged her place in Mario's heart. My cousin grabbed her by the hair and threw her out. Mario, as if nothing had happened, casually closed the door, then happily put his arm around my cousin's waist and said to her, "Don't be unreasonable. Since you're here, go say hello to third brother." My cousin had just fought a battle. Her collar was torn open, and her hair was a mess. She calmly tidied herself up and said, "All right. I'll be over there once I'm ready." Mario left my cousin and went ahead on his own. There was a group of people over there, handsome men and beautiful women, looking sharp and vibrant. I couldn't tell if they were playing board games or chatting, but either way, it was quieter compared to the loudness around the pool. My cousin glanced in that direction, then subtly gestured for the bridesmaids to come closer, lowering her voice as she whispered in their ears, "Did you see that table? Except for the guy in the middle, the rest are decent targets." When she mentioned the guy in the middle, I curiously looked over, and when I saw him, I froze. It took me a while to pull my gaze away. I saw him. He didn't see me. It was Matthew. Matthew, now 4 years older, was different from the one I remembered. Gone was the youthful innocence. His features had deepened, becoming more stable and mature, and he exuded a remarkable aura. Among the bridesmaids, the most beautiful girl, upon laying her eyes on him, immediately asked my cousin, "Why isn't he one of the options?" My cousin tugged at the girl's arm and, for once, spoke in a serious tone, "Him? We're not in his league. Don't get any ideas, or we'll all end up in trouble." The girl, named Robin, was a proud one, and upon hearing this, she simply said, "Oh," as if she had been convinced. Chapter 5. I tried to say that I wasn't good at socializing and didn't want to go over to greet them. "Are you crazy?" My cousin pulled me forward. "With your qualifications, you should meet more young talents." She was always so bold in her actions. I was worried it might cause a scene, so I quickly compromised and followed her quietly to the table. My cousin greeted Matthew as third brother and did so in a very proper manner. Matthew, as always, was a gentleman, but something seemed different. There was a layer of distance around him, giving off an impression of being approachable while still being hard to get close to. My cousin smiled brightly. "I didn't know third brother was here, or I would have brought my girlfriends to hang out earlier." Robin smoothly took over the conversation. She greeted Matthew with confidence, calling out, "Hello, third brother." Matthew glanced at her, offering a faint smile. A young man sitting next to him tried to smooth things over. "Not many people dare call him third brother." "Sister, you might as well just call him young Master Matthew with us." Robin playfully stuck out her tongue, and with ease apologized. "Sorry, young Master Matthew." I silently admired her emotional intelligence for smoothly easing the awkwardness. But unexpectedly, my cousin spoke up. "Third brother, this is my cousin, Juliet." After saying that, she stepped aside, fully revealing me. The room suddenly brightened, and several pairs of eyes landed on me. The one right in front of me was particularly sharp, almost piercing, and as soon as I felt it, I immediately sensed a cold, intense presence. Knowing I couldn't avoid it, I slowly raised my eyes and met his gaze. It was that familiar yet strange face. I clenched my fists and pretended to be calm, smiling. "Hello, young Master Matthew." Matthew's lips pressed into a thin line. He stared at me without speaking. He looked unusually cold. The atmosphere wasn't exactly bad. We both faked it well. No one seemed to notice that something was off between us. My cousin continued introducing her friends. The bridesmaids were also actively trying to join the group at the table. Matthew's friends were all friendly, and no one was giving my cousin a hard time, keeping the atmosphere lively, until Matthew suddenly called out, "Juliet." He unexpectedly called my name. His voice wasn't loud, but it immediately silenced the entire room. My heart skipped a beat uncontrollably, and I instinctively looked at him. He was sitting on the sofa, looking up at me, his face expressionless. He slowly uttered 4 words from his throat. He said, "Long time no see." Then, there was a pin-drop silence. After a few seconds, my cousin, surprised, found her voice and asked, "Sis, do you and third brother know each other?" The question was finally out in the open. addressed directly to me. I was at a loss for words. After a moment of careful consideration, I replied, "We're alumni." Matthew continued to stare at me, and upon hearing this, his body slightly tensed. He stood up from the sofa, walked toward me step by step. His movements weren't fast, but his presence carried a heavy, low pressure, as if a storm was about to break. When he reached me, he stopped, standing right in front of me, and with a tone that almost seemed self-mocking, he asked, "So, does that mean I'm not even considered an ex-boyfriend?" Chapter 6. I didn't expect him to ask that question. I was unprepared and couldn't find the words. Matthew seemed impatient, looking at Mario and saying, "It's getting late. It's time to call it a night." Mario immediately caught on, quickly saying, "Aw, yes, that's it for today. Let's wrap it up, everyone." The party ended. Matthew reached out and grabbed my wrist. "I'll give you a ride." "No, where his hand touched felt like an electric current running through me, and I couldn't bring myself to pull away, allowing him to lead me away from the gossiping eyes of the crowd. The car moved quietly along the road. The windows were rolled up. The air conditioning was on. It was only a half-hour drive to the hotel, but we never reached our destination. I watched the scenery moving behind the car window, slowly realizing that the car I was in was aimlessly driving through City A. I didn't ask anything, pretending not to notice. Matthew continued driving aimlessly, and I wasn't sure how long it lasted until I finally spoke to break the silence. I said, "Matthew, I'm tired." He kept his eyes straight ahead, as if he hadn't heard me, but after a brief moment, he turned the steering wheel. Half an hour later, the car stopped in front of the hotel. I unbuckled my seatbelt, opened the car door, hesitated for a few seconds, then silently got out and walked away. "Juliet." I heard him call behind me. I stopped and turned around. Matthew's hand was still on the steering wheel, and his eyes were fixed on me, his expression unreadable. I remained cold and silent. He didn't get any response, as if he couldn't stand my cold attitude. He lowered his eyelids, hiding the extra emotions in his eyes. When he looked up again, it was as if nothing had happened, and he said to me, "Good night." I replied with a brief then quickly turned and left, feeling chaotic inside. I had just returned to the hotel when my cousin called. "Sis, you and third brother." I knew what was coming, so I interrupted her. "We're not involved." "Oh, okay, that's good." She said it was good, but clearly, my cousin wasn't entirely at ease. "Sis, don't blame me for being nosy. You might not know the situation with Matthew's family. People like them, we're just not in their league. Don't make a mistake and ruin your life. He has a fiancée, Daniela. You might not have heard of her. She's the youngest daughter of the Jean family, the real darling, and even Mario's mother has to bow to her. Sis, if you get involved." I was getting a headache and interrupted her again. "I know. I know the situation with Matthew's family, and I know who his fiancée is. You don't need to worry about all these things." "Really? You knew all along?" My cousin finally seemed relieved. "Well, as long as you know, I'll hang up now." "All right." After hanging up, I sat down on the couch, holding my phone in my hand, and sat in a daze. I couldn't stop thinking about Matthew. Ever since seeing him today, every little thing he did, every subtle expression, the tone of his voice, and the way he looked at me, all kept playing in my mind over and over again. I was surprised by how clearly I remembered each and every frame. I exhaled deeply, leaning back on the sofa, lifting my wrists to cover my eyes. I gave myself 5 more minutes, forcing myself to pull away from these images, to bury Matthew deep in my heart, in a place where I couldn't see or touch him. Chapter 7. The worst wedding I've ever witnessed in my life was my cousin's wedding. My cousin's mother-in-law's surname is Wu. Mario Wu took his mother's surname. Mrs. Wu had a very strong personality. Mario went against her wishes and insisted on marrying my cousin, which made Mrs. Wu very displeased. But because she couldn't go against her only son, after making a long list of unreasonable demands, and having them met, Mrs. Wu reluctantly agreed to let my cousin marry into the Wu family. My cousin's life in the wealthy family wasn't easy. and the hints of it were already visible at the wedding. The wedding process was entirely arranged by Mrs. Wu, and my cousin followed behind her the entire time, acting small and humble. If she said the wrong thing or did something that displeased Mrs. Wu, it would lead to a scolding. My cousin was scolded to the point of being unable to lift her head, but she had to keep up the smile and play the role of the bride. Mrs. Wu didn't regard my cousin at all, and by extension, she also treated the guests my cousin invited like they were invisible. During the toasts, my cousin accidentally called a guest by the wrong name. This particular guest was someone Mrs. Wu highly valued. Mrs. Wu's expression immediately changed. After apologizing to the guest, she couldn't hold back anymore and called my cousin to a private room, where she scolded her severely. No one dared to intervene. Before marrying my cousin, Mario had made it very clear that his mother had a bad temper, and that any real young lady marrying into their family would likely not be able to stand his mother's attitude. One of the conditions for marrying my cousin was that she had to put up with his mother's bad temper. My cousin agreed. So now, as my cousin was being bullied by her mother-in-law, Mario didn't want to get involved, let alone help. As for the other 6 bridesmaids, they were all too afraid of Mrs. Wu. They kept their heads down, acting like quails. Only I couldn't bear to see it. No matter what, my cousin was the one who had grown up with me. I didn't want to see her so helpless and alone. The sound of the scolding coming from the room was filled with so much disdain and insult that I couldn't bear to listen. I knocked on the door and entered without permission. When Mrs. Wu realized someone had entered without permission, her eyebrows shot up in displeasure. Before she could speak, I politely said, "Aunt, the guests are waiting for the next part of the event." When she realized I was from my cousin's side of the family, Mrs. Wu gave me a sideways glance. She lifted her head high, and her voice was cold and filled with arrogant disdain. "Who allowed you to come in? No manners. Get out." My cousin's pale face was filled with embarrassment. Perhaps she had once thought she could handle her mother-in-law's bullying, but at this moment, she realized it wasn't as simple as she imagined. I don't know if she regretted it. She should know well that the real life only begins after the wedding. I had no intention of clashing with Mrs. Wu. After all, my cousin would have to live under her roof in the future. Not wanting to make things awkward, I tried to soften my words. "The bride's makeup is smudged. We need to touch it up. How about I take her downstairs to fix it, Aunt? And you can calm down a bit?" However, Mrs. Wu wasn't having any of it. She seemed to scorn the idea of talking to me, instead turning to my cousin to mock her harshly. "Is this the kind of relative you have? Humph. I should have expected as much from your family." Knock knock. The sound of knocking interrupted Mrs. Wu's words. A tall figure stood at the door. He nonchalantly looked at me and casually spoke. "I've been looking for you. What are you doing here?" I didn't immediately grasp his intentions until I heard Mrs. Wu ask cautiously, "Does Matthew know Lisa's cousin?" She didn't even know my last name, only referring to me as Lisa's cousin. "My cousin," as if saved, quickly responded. "Third brother and my sister are alumni." "That explains it." Mrs. Wu chuckled, her voice now soft and light. She changed her tone completely from before, and she pulled my cousin's hand, smiling warmly as she patted it. "Lisa, you should learn from your cousin. She's obviously a capable person, decisive, eloquent, and knows how to conduct herself." My cousin froze for a moment. I couldn't reply either. We were both stunned by the sudden and complete change in Mrs. Wu's attitude. Chapter 8. Mrs. Wu's attitude toward me made a complete 180-degree turn, and by extension, my cousin also benefited from it. The wedding proceeded smoothly after that. All of this was thanks to Matthew. Matthew, sitting beside me with his long limbs, asked, after the wedding, "Are you going back to City C?" I stared at the wedding stage, not looking at him, answering in a rather perfunctory tone, "Yes. My flight is tomorrow morning. The ticket's already booked." He fell silent for a moment, then looked up at the sky and spoke in a low voice. "There are many interesting places in City A. If you're interested, I can take you around." "No need," I rejected firmly. "I have work to do back home." Matthew paused again, his gaze distant, then asked, "What time is your flight tomorrow?" "I'll take you. No trouble. It's easy to grab a taxi from the hotel." "Juliet." His voice suddenly rose an octave. and I felt a sudden tightness in my chest. Then he asked, "Is it that no matter what, all I'll get from you is rejection?" In truth, his repeated concessions had pushed me into a corner. With a burst of determination, I blurted out, "I have a boyfriend now, and we're already talking about marriage." Matthew froze, like someone had struck him mute. I thought to myself, perhaps I should just change my flight. As soon as my cousin's wedding was over, I would return to City C. No need to wait until tomorrow. However, before I could express my intention to leave early, my cousin asked me first, "Sis, can you stay with me at the Wu family house for a while before you leave?" She clasped her hands together, her eyes full of pleading. She was hoping I would stay. This way, Mrs. Wu might show my cousin some mercy, considering me. But Mrs. Wu didn't care about my face. She cared about Matthew. But why should I use Matthew's influence for this? I was firm. "No, I'm leaving early tomorrow." My cousin grabbed my wrist and pouted, acting like a child. "Sis, please stay a few more days. Mario's mother is so fierce and scary. Stay with me a few more days. Let me get used to it." I pulled my hand away sharply, showing no mercy. "Fong me. From the moment you decided to marry Mario, you should have known that everything you face in the future is a consequence you'll have to endure." Perhaps it was harsh, but my cousin couldn't take it. She was embarrassed and angered. "Fine. If you don't want to stay. I just wanted you to have a few more days to enjoy City A." Her reasons sounded flimsy and laughable. I didn't expose her lie. My cousin's marriage, as she had hoped, had allowed her to climb up the social ladder. Her family moved from a small county to City C, living in a large villa with a driver and a maid, taking luxury cars everywhere. That lavish lifestyle made others envious. Everyone praised my cousin for her success, and her parents enjoyed the blessings of their daughter. But who saw the humiliation and hardships hidden behind that fortune? Even the most ordinary couples can't avoid family conflicts, let alone someone with nothing marrying into a glamorous wealthy family. The inequality in marriage, with the stronger party viewing the weaker party as unworthy of standing tall, is inevitable. This was just the wealthy family my cousin could match. If it were someone like Matthew, the insurmountable gulf would be in front of her. It's not necessary to wade through the stream to understand that the flood would crash and shatter anyone who falls in. My cousin chose the path I had rejected. That path, apart from Matthew, was covered with thorns. One wrong step, and it leads to the abyss. When I harshly advised my cousin, wasn't I also advising myself? As Matthew repeatedly got closer to me, only to be rejected each time, showing a heartbroken expression, when he heard me say I had a boyfriend, and his entire demeanor froze in disbelief. I couldn't ignore my true feelings. My heart tightened with pain. When we broke up, Matthew had said that it would be best if we never saw each other again, or else he couldn't guarantee what he might do. It turns out he was serious. Only when I am far enough from him, far enough to never see him again, can I seem to control myself. Otherwise, I fear I will become the foolish donkey, lured by the apple, running headfirst into the flames, knowing the dangers but charging forward without hesitation. Chapter 9. I couldn't wait to leave City A. However, things didn't go as planned. On the way to the airport, I was in a car accident. After the screeching sound of brakes, the car spun out of control. My leg was trapped, and my head hit the window, bleeding. In my dazed state, I heard the sirens of the ambulance approaching. When I woke up in the hospital, Matthew was by my side. He was holding my hand, his lips pressed against my hand, his eyes bloodshot as if he hadn't slept at all. The doctor said I was lucky. The accident had killed the driver on the spot, and I only suffered a mild concussion, along with a crack in the tibia of my right calf and slight displacement. The treatment was simple, realigning the bone and putting on a cast, with weekly follow-up appointments for x-rays. If the healing went well and the bone stayed aligned, I could avoid surgery. But if it shifted more, surgery would still be necessary. In any case, I couldn't put weight on my foot and would need to rest like I was disabled. Since I was awake, I didn't want to waste any more of Matthew's time, so I urged him to go back and rest. It seemed like he hadn't recovered from the shock of me almost dying in the accident. His face looked awful as he asked, "If I leave, who will take care of you?" "I can hire a nurse." "A nurse won't do." I don't trust that. I'll call my cousin. Your cousin is on her honeymoon with Mario and won't be back anytime soon. I was speechless. In City A, besides my cousin, I didn't know anyone else. Maybe I could ask my parents for help. But thinking of my parents flying all the way here and possibly running into Matthew, I instinctively dismissed that thought. I couldn't let my bond with Matthew get any deeper. Seeing my dilemma, Matthew suddenly asked, "What about your boyfriend? You came to City A for a wedding, but he didn't come with you. You get into an accident. Think about everyone, but didn't think to have him take care of you?" My heart skipped a beat, and I warily looked at Matthew. Noticing my anxious expression, Matthew didn't even flinch. His face remained unchanged as he said, "Juliet, I know you're lying." He confidently exposed me. I couldn't argue, so I just pressed my lips together and closed my eyes, pretending to be dead. I insisted on hiring a nurse. Matthew, unusually forceful, took me back to his house. It was a spacious apartment, his own place. I was placed in the master bedroom. His room. He seemed not to be busy. He had plenty of time to hover around me every day. I forced myself to sleep. I thought, once I fell asleep, he'd get bored and leave. With this thought in mind, every time Matthew entered the room, I pretended to be asleep. I thought he would leave, but instead, he walked directly to the side of the bed. Soon, I felt a faint, almost imperceptible touch. His fingers brushing through my hair, moving down to my nose. When his fingers reached my lips, they lingered. Then, there was a wave of electric tingling, the rough touch of his fingers gently tracing my lips. It dawned on me that he was tracing my outline with his fingers. My mind involuntarily conjured the image of his long fingers hovering in midair. Matthew leaning down to gaze at me, and my heart started pounding loudly in my chest. I regretted pretending to be asleep. Would waking up now seem too deliberate? Just as I thought this, the bed dipped, and immediately, Matthew's warm breath brushed against my lips. My heart stopped, and I didn't have time to gather myself. Before I could think any further, his kiss landed. I was startled and instinctively tried to push him away. He ignored my resistance, bracing himself on the bed with one hand, while the other slid under my head to deepen the kiss. It wasn't until we were both breathless that we stopped. I was filled with a mixture of emotions, frustrated and furious. I yelled at him, "What's this about? Because I broke up with you. You've been holding on to this for years, and now you want to force me into submission?" Upon hearing this, Matthew's aura seemed to darken. I saw him clench his jaw tightly, his fist balling up. He took several deep breaths before finally managing to steady his voice and say, "Juliet, don't provoke me with your words." I glared at him, angry at his provocation, and even angrier at myself for my helpless resistance. I should have stayed away from him, just as I had done for the past 4 years. Instead, every time he got close, I ended up helplessly falling apart. Chapter 10. I deliberately kept my distance from Matthew. I built an impenetrable wall between us with coldness, clearly defining the safety zone I considered acceptable. Once Matthew crossed that line, I would use my indifference to push him back. This unspoken rule, which I had secretly set, was something Matthew was well aware of. He played along, then tested the limits of my tolerance within the boundaries I allowed. Over time, our relationship subtly developed into a delicate balance, like a teeter-totter teetering on the verge of collapse, both of us working together to maintain the fragile equilibrium. My leg injury required 4 to 6 weeks of rest, and during this time, Matthew left the house only once. It was quite a coincidence. On the day he left, an uninvited guest arrived at the house. Matthew's sister, Bianca. Matthew had hired 2 nurses to take care of me. It was the nurse who opened the door to Bianca. I had never met Matthew's family, and I barely knew his friends. But Bianca got straight to the point. She said, "I know third brother is out, so I came to see you while he's not here. How should I address you? Should I call you third sister-in-law or Juliet's sister? Both terms felt off. You can just call me Juliet." Bianca sat down in the chair. That chair was usually where Matthew sat, right next to the bed, very close to me. Once seated, Bianca didn't speak, but stared at me with her large, black and white eyes, scrutinizing me carefully. I wasn't used to being stared at like that. So I asked. You came to see me on purpose. Is there something you want? I'm just curious. Bianca smiled sweetly. I wanted to see what kind of girl could make my third brother so captivated. I couldn't quite figure out her true intentions. I decided not to rush with questions, smiled at her, and patiently waited for her to get to the point. Sure enough, after a short wait, Bianca asked, Juliet's sister, when will your leg get better? I answered, I'll go for a checkup next week. If there are no issues, I should be able to get the cast off. That's great. My birthday is next Friday. If you're free, you can come to my birthday party. Sorry. I refused without hesitation. I'll probably already be gone from City A by then. Really not coming? I've invited Daniela, third brother's fiancée. Now it became clear why she had come to find me today. I smiled, deliberately avoiding the topic of Daniela, and answered lightly, I still have work to handle. I need to get back. Bianca clearly didn't like beating around the bush, seeing I wasn't engaging with the topic. She asked bluntly, Juliet's sister, aren't you curious about Daniela? I firmly said, I'm not curious. She paused, then brought up another topic. Speaking of which, this is our first meeting. Aren't you curious why I know your name? I sensed the underlying meaning in her words and was taken aback. I answered frankly, I thought Matthew must have mentioned me. Bianca chuckled. No, third brother never mentioned you. He didn't want to cause trouble for you. So he's been careful and hasn't mentioned you to anyone. But we're not fools. After third brother graduated from university, he could have continued his studies. But instead, he rushed home to work. He worked hard. Whatever task was given to him, he always completed it. Our parents were so pleased, thinking third brother was ambitious, until he used the results he'd worked for to negotiate with them. The first condition he set was to break up with Daniela. My mom thought something was off and sent someone to investigate. That's when they found out about you. Your name is what my mom told me, and a lot about you. For example, how you walked away from third brother without looking back, went back to City C, and became a TV station reporter. One time, you interviewed fruit farmers and saw how hard their lives were. The fruits they worked so hard to grow couldn't sell, and rotted in the fields. You felt sorry for them, so you quit your job at the TV station and started from scratch in the wholesale fruit business. The worst year, you suffered huge losses, but you never cheated the farmers out of a single penny. You ran all over the place, and finally made it through the tough times. Now you have a large fruit market with a dedicated fruit sales app, and your sales are doing quite well. Did I get that right? Juliet's sister? Yes, that's right, I said calmly, but inside, I was shocked. I had no idea that for all these years, I had been under someone's watch. There had been a pair of eyes secretly observing me, and I hadn't noticed at all. Chapter 11. Bianca seemed to sense my thoughts. She lowered her gaze apologetically and said, Juliet, our family has been paying close attention to you. I hope you won't mind. It's mainly because third brother's behavior has been, well, quite obsessive. Because of you, after you two broke up, he first aggressively proposed to break off his engagement, then secretly started his own business behind our parents' backs. At first, our father had intended for third brother to work with my eldest brother, but third brother refused. Father and son had a huge argument. To be honest, it's lucky we have so many children in our family. Third brother still has my older brother and second brother supporting him. Realizing the conversation was veering off course, Bianca quickly redirected it. Speaking earnestly, Juliet, our family can be difficult to deal with. Anyone who marries into our family, their parents and elders have to approve after much deliberation before we give our consent. It's unavoidable. For ordinary people, a failed marriage only means dividing up assets. But for us, it could mean the rise or fall of the entire family. So we have to be cautious. Compared to an ordinary family who might not understand the consequences, children raised in the same family are more aware of the stakes involved. So they are better suited to be our partners. Of course, that's not always the case. For example, my parents have a very high opinion of you. She paused for a moment before continuing. Juliet, third brother has already broken off his engagement with Daniela. He's single now. No, to be precise, He's been single for the past 4 years. Since you two broke up, he hasn't been with anyone else. I couldn't help but ask, are you a spokesperson hired by third brother? Bianca shook her head vigorously. No, my mom sent me. I'm the one doing the talking for her. I couldn't tell how much of what Bianca said was true or false. After thinking for a moment, I asked, can I still attend your birthday party? Of course. You're always welcome, she said happily. Juliet's sister. Why did you change your mind? Because I remembered that the year we broke up, Matthew had begged me to give him 5 years. At the time, I had coldly refused. I thought the 5-year agreement was no longer valid, but I never expected that he had been holding on to it alone all this time. If everything Bianca said was true, then Matthew had silently done so much. I shouldn't be so afraid to at least take a step into his world and see it for myself. I just wanted to choose the life I most wanted. And that didn't mean I was being a coward. That evening, after learning that Bianca had come to visit, the first thing Matthew did when he came back was come to my room and ask, what did you talk about with my sister? I answered truthfully. She invited me to her birthday party. Seeing that I didn't seem upset, his demeanor relaxed. He asked, are you going? I lied and said, I turned her down. This answer seemed to be exactly what he expected. He nodded, said nothing, but there was a faint, almost imperceptible sadness in his air. The cast was removed on Thursday. Matthew found an excuse about me needing time to adjust to walking, and he insisted on keeping me for one more night. The next day, when I woke up, I found that he wasn't there. I assumed he had left to attend the birthday party. I opened the bathroom door without any warning. Matthew had just finished his shower. He was topless, drying his hair with a towel in front of the mirror. His well-toned muscles were clearly visible, and I couldn't help but notice the necklace hanging around his neck, which looked like a chain. Before this, I hadn't noticed that he wore a necklace. I felt a sudden and awkward sense of having taken advantage of someone, so I quickly blurted out sorry and turned to leave, trying to avoid the situation. But he reached out and pulled me back, pressing my body against the bathroom counter. I looked into the mirror and clearly saw Matthew's tall figure behind me. His damp hair was softly pressed against his cheek, and his face was devoid of expression. He seemed to be suppressing something so deeply that all the intense emotions were hidden beneath the surface. Silently raging, his bangs cast shadows beneath his eyes. Matthew lifted his eyes, which were unclear and unreadable, and stared at my reflection in the mirror, asking, will you leave? My mind was in a haze. What? His voice was low and husky. Will I be able to see you when I come home tonight? Before I could answer, he suddenly pinched my cheek with his thumb and index finger and gently twisted my head to the side. I leaned toward him under the pressure, and he took that opportunity to lower his face, his lips pressing against the exposed skin of my neck. A wave of burning heat swept over me. I trembled in his arms, my voice weak and faint like a mosquito's buzz. You will. He must have thought I was afraid of leaving marks, so he stopped his advances. Even though my body was taut with the sharp desire coursing through me, he paused, burying his face in my neck and slowly regulated his breathing. It seemed like no matter how many times this happened, as long as I called for a stop, he would always be able to hold back. A bitter ache began to well up in my chest. I turned and embraced him, pressing my face against his chest. I won't leave today. No matter where you go, no matter what you do, no matter how late you come back, I'll wait for you, okay? Matthew hesitated in disbelief, then pulled me tightly into his arms, holding me as if never wanting to let go. Chapter 12. The only reason I went to the birthday party was to meet Matthew's mother. If Bianca wasn't lying, she was sent by Mrs. Song as a spokesperson, since Mrs. Song had sent her in advance and also warmly invited me to the birthday party. It was almost certain that Mrs. Song would be there too. Sure enough, I saw Mrs. Song. She was the center of attention, standing out among a group of well-dressed women with a noble air all her own. I wasn't without hesitation. The thought of being watched for 4 years, without knowing it, weighed on my mind. Even if I wasn't being scrutinized by the elders, choosing to be with Matthew would eventually make me one of those women in the circle. I knew that once I took this step, it would be hard to go back and seek peace. I hesitated for a moment, but Matthew's figure flashed through my mind. If he insisted, I couldn't bear to see him struggle alone. Putting aside all the distractions, I walked toward Mrs. Song without turning back. Mrs. Song had already noticed me, but she didn't rush. It wasn't until I took the initiative to approach her that she finally smiled. I went straight to the point. Mrs. Song, hello, I'm Juliet. May I ask if I can fall in love with your son, Matthew? Both Mrs. Song and I knew exactly what I was asking for. What I was asking wasn't for permission, but for equality. Her nod and promise of yes meant that in my future interactions with Matthew, I would receive enough respect from his family. They would look at me as an equal, not from above. This was crucial for any woman entering a relationship with marriage in mind. As the guest of honor at the birthday party, Bianca took Matthew's arm and stepped onto the stage. Today, she wore a fluffy princess dress, her smile radiant, surrounded by blessings, as happy as an innocent child. Matthew played the role of the prince, staying by his sister's side. Halfway through the party, a young girl suddenly rushed in and buried herself in Matthew's arms. Bianca was shoved to the side. The girl, clearly distressed, hid her face in Matthew's chest, hugging his waist tightly, her shoulders shaking as she cried. Daniela, what are you doing? Bianca urgently tried to pull the girl away from Matthew. The young girl twisted her arm and shrugged Bianca off. To avoid any awkwardness, Matthew raised both hands in a surrendering gesture, letting the girl cry in his arms without offering comfort. He didn't know I was there, but Bianca did. When she noticed I was paying attention to what was going on, Bianca looked regretful and subtly signaled to Matthew. Third brother, Juliet's sister is watching. Matthew turned his head toward me. The next second, his brows shot up in surprise, and he pulled Daniela out of his arms. Daniela was caught off guard, her face showing shock. She tried to continue crying in Matthew's arms, but saw him walking toward me. So instead, she wailed loudly and threw herself into Bianca's arms. Matthew took a few steps toward me, his breathing quick and hurried, and his explanation was just as flustered. She suddenly rushed in. I didn't expect it. She's like Bianca. I just treat her as a little girl. I feel guilty about the broken engagement. So in front of everyone, I didn't want to embarrass her. That's why I didn't push her away right away. I moved over on the sofa to make space, patted the empty spot beside me and gestured for Matthew to sit down. Sit down and talk. I'm tired of craning my neck to look at you. He obediently sat beside me, his gaze still tense, as if trying to gauge whether I was angry. I reached out and tugged at the lapel of his suit, pulling him closer. With my other hand, I reached into the collar of his shirt and pulled out the necklace hanging around his neck. That necklace is holding my ring, isn't it? We had exchanged rings at the wedding in Canterbury Cathedral. I had returned the ring to him when we broke up. That day, I noticed the ring hanging from the necklace around his neck. So, he had been wearing it secretly all this time. I undid the necklace, took the ring off, and put it back on. It still fit perfectly. An impulse surged within me, and I asked Matthew, "Do you think it would be wrong if we left early?" He seemed confused about what I was trying to do but still answered, "No." Then let's go back. I want to be alone with you, Matthew. I've missed you so much. I had never told him that I was also struggling, that for the past 4 years since we broke up, every single day, I had missed him terribly. Later, I asked Matthew, if I hadn't come to City A, if we hadn't met again, would we have missed our chance? He pulled me tightly into his arms. Juliet, didn't you realize? The thing I promised you I'd do in 5 years, I did in 4. I was afraid 5 years would be too long, and you would forget me. So, I rushed and tried to get to you as quickly as I could. All that it's better if we don't meet, that was a lie. If you didn't come, I would have gone to see you. We wouldn't have missed each other, because I will always be steadfastly running toward you. Story 2. After my 6th chemotherapy session, I secretly snuck out of the hospital to find my boyfriend, Alex. I just wanted to tell him that I was almost better, so he wouldn't worry about me. But that night, I saw him holding my college roommate, Eva, in his arms. I used to think that if Alex was no longer in my life, I'd surely die. Turns out, he's not that important after all. Not long after, Alex came looking for me, filled with regret and guilt. I looked at him coldly. Slap yourself. When I've had enough fun, I'll forgive you. Without a word, he raised his hand, watching his swollen, red face. I yawned. Luis came back with food, wrapped his arms around my waist, rested his head on my shoulder, and marveled, "Wow, Julia, your ex-boyfriend is really obedient." Chapter 1. Are you out of your mind? I told you. You just finished chemotherapy, you can't be running around and eating spicy food. And what do? The moment I step out to use the bathroom, you sneak out to eat. Luis, the doctor who's always so gentle and smiling, was now scolding me angrily. The car sped down the road like it was flying, and I sat in the passenger seat, tears streaming down my face. The only sound in the car was my intermittent sobbing. Slowly, the car began to decelerate, and Luis returned to his usual calm tone. It's not that you can't go out, but this chemo session just ended. You should at least wait 2 or 3 more days to be monitored, right? If you don't take care of yourself and show up sick in front of your boyfriend, won't he be worried? Clutching my cramping stomach, pale as a ghost, I felt an eerie sense of calm. Alex cheated on me, about half a month ago. My condition suddenly worsened. I had to move up my scheduled chemo session to the following day. After it was over, I snuck out of the hospital. I wanted to surprise Alex and tell him I was almost better, so he wouldn't worry. But as soon as I got out of the taxi, I saw Alex holding hands with my quiet college roommate, Eva, walking toward me. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, unable to accept that Alex, the man who loved me the most, could cheat on me with someone as quiet and reserved as Eva. They kept getting closer. In my panic, I felt like I was the one in the wrong, like I was the cheater or the third party. Seeing a restaurant nearby, I didn't hesitate and walked right in. There weren't many people inside. The owner saw me and came over to greet me. "What would you like to eat?" I was about to refuse, but then I heard Eva's voice behind me. "Alex, Julia's in the hospital undergoing chemotherapy. Isn't it a bit inappropriate for us to be on a date here?" Eva leaned on Alex's shoulder, sounding uneasy, terrified they'd recognize my voice. I quickly pointed to a few random dishes on the menu and handed it to the owner. Alex, holding Eva by the waist, gave her a firm squeeze and smirked. "Why so impatient? We're out in public. Save the teasing for the hotel." Eva giggled as Alex tickled her, nestling deeper into his embrace. "Why are you so bad?" He lowered his voice, his hand roaming further. "I can be worse." Chapter 2. They didn't see me and sat down right in front of me. Eva and Alex suddenly felt like strangers. Flashes of past memories came to mind. Alex's gentle replies when he leaned in to listen to me. His awkward yet sincere efforts to cook bland meals for me. The redness in his eyes when I coughed up blood. Every moment of care I thought we shared. Every instant of love turned out to be a lie. The food and rice were brought out together, the spicy aroma filling the air and prickling my nerves. Driven by a strange impulse, I wanted to try the kind of spicy food I hadn't eaten since I was 10 years old. So, as I listened to their unbearable flirtation, I began shoveling food into my mouth. My lips, already numb, couldn't feel the heat, and the food tasted bitter and harsh. My stomach churned, and I suddenly felt exhausted, dizzy. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and went to the counter to pay. 78 yuan received via Alipay. The owner heard the notification and, noticing how I kept my head down with a mask on, sensed something was off and asked, "Are you all right, young lady?" I shook my head and hurriedly left the restaurant. The moment I stepped outside, the previously quiet pair started whispering again. That scared me. If Julia weren't still in the hospital doing chemo, I would have thought it was her. Damn, I'm in the mood now. Forget eating. Let's order takeout at the hotel. So exciting. Alex. They laughed as they left their seats, heading toward the hotel. They were the ones doing something wrong. So why was I the one feeling so anxious? My stomach turned again, and I gasped for breath. Struggling to hail a cab, several empty taxis sped past me, as if afraid the sickly-looking person might die in their car. Just as I was about to faint, a black car stopped in front of me. Luis got out with a dark expression, scooping me up in a bridal carry. I wanted to push him away, but I had no strength left. I couldn't even speak. Luis stayed silent the entire way back to the hospital. I didn't make it. As soon as we arrived, I collapsed to my knees on the ground. When I woke up, daylight streamed in, and Luis was sitting by my bedside, frowning as he looked at my x-rays. Seeing the expression on his face, I suddenly felt strangely at ease. Has my condition worsened? Chapter 3. It was only then that he noticed I was awake, his eyes avoiding mine. The tumor has developed resistance to the medication. After saying that, he looked at me more firmly. We can switch to new drugs. Find other targeted therapies. Things will get better. I didn't respond, just stared out the window. I don't want to keep fighting. It's pointless. The sunlight stung my eyes, but I kept looking at it, tears falling without me realizing it. Luis, refusing to give up, kept talking. Medical technology is so advanced now, both here and abroad. If necessary, we can try radiotherapy and chemotherapy again. You're showing signs of improvement. I turned my head and interrupted him, my voice louder but weaker. How long are you going to keep lying to me? The cancer has already spread. I've been fighting this for 15 years. Don't you think I know by now if I'm going to get better? He didn't try to stop me again. That same day, I completed my discharge papers. At home, I lay in bed, with no appetite, waiting silently for death to come in the middle of the night. I realized that when people feel unloved, they often hurt themselves, hoping it will somehow bring comfort. But it doesn't. So what if it doesn't work? Soon, I won't even matter. I still couldn't understand. After all these years, was there really no genuine love? The phone rang at the worst possible moment, interrupting my sadness. Annoyed, I answered. Even this last bit of sorrow couldn't go uninterrupted. How's chemo going, baby? It was Alex, his lazy tone laced with a bit of affection, as if he hadn't spent the night flirting with Eva. Fine, I responded mechanically. That's good. I'll come pick you up when you're discharged in a few days. I've been busy with work, so I haven't had time to visit. Alex's cheerful voice gradually faded, as if he were disappointed. I felt a twinge of bitterness, my nose stinging again. I tried to keep my voice steady, hiding any trace of emotion. Let's break up. Are you losing your mind because of chemo? The playful Alex suddenly got angry. One day you're happy, the next you're not. You told me your dad abused you, so you deserved it. I really don't know what's gotten into you this time. Chapter 4. A sharp pain tugged at my chest. Those moments of vulnerability, when I had opened up to him, seemed to hit me now. There was some static on the line before Alex spoke again, lowering his voice in irritation. I'm busy. I'll hang up now. Get some rest. The call ended abruptly. On the other end, Eva wrapped her arms around Alex's neck, her voice sweet. Did Julia upset you again? Alex's expression softened, and he gently stroked Eva's cheek. Yeah, she's mad because I said I wouldn't visit her for a couple of days. I don't know what her problem is. I remained lying on my bed, feeling a bit lost. If he didn't like me anymore, why wouldn't he just break up with me? The Alex at 25 couldn't compare to the Alex at 10. Honestly, it's pretty pathetic to even think of dying over a man. Suddenly, I felt hungry. I picked up my phone, thinking of ordering takeout. But Alex's words echoed in my head. Damn. I'm in the mood now. Forget eating. Let's order takeout at the hotel. Disgusting. I decided to go out to eat instead. I got up and left my apartment, only to see Luis standing alone outside. Surprised, I walked over to greet him. I didn't expect to run into you here. He put out his cigarette, took a few steps away, and waved his hand to disperse the smoke, smiling at me. The hospital's nearby. It's convenient for work, so I bought an apartment here. But I'm so busy, I hardly ever come home. He suddenly turned to look at me. Want to grab something to eat? I started walking ahead. Sure, let's go. We sat down at a small restaurant nearby, both of us lost in thought, saying nothing. When the lamb noodles were served, I grabbed the spoon and added a lot of chili to my bowl. Luis's pupils contracted. You can't eat spicy food. I didn't stop. I'm dying anyway. Why bother with the rules? He didn't say anything after that. Once I put the spoon down, He picked it up and ladled chili oil into his own bowl. The spice made my nose run, and I kept tissues in hand as I ate. I pulled another tissue from the box and blew my nose when my phone rang. I raised my eyelids slightly. It was Eva. The last time we'd spoken was back in our second year of college, before my cancer relapsed. She had run out of shampoo and asked if she could borrow mine. I heard you're breaking up with Alex. Eva's urgent voice came through the phone as soon as I answered. I tossed the tissue into the trash, pretending to be confused. No. Where did you hear that? Chapter 5. Her voice suddenly became hesitant. Well, I ran into Alex on the street today. We were just chatting. And he told me. My tone was cheerful. He must have been joking. How could I possibly break up with him? He treats me so well and loves me so much. She gave an awkward laugh. I thought so too. Alex really shouldn't be sharing everything with outsiders. I sighed. Anyway, I can't chat. The pearl necklace he bought me just arrived. I need to go downstairs and get the package. She fell silent. I continued. You wouldn't believe it. Alex saved up for so long to buy me this necklace. He said pearls are good for my health since I'm not doing well. What a waste of money. My voice, full of complaint, was laced with happiness. Eva laughed nervously. Ha ha. Well, I guess he's really good to you. Yeah. Anyway, I really need to go. Talk later. I immediately hung up the phone and looked at Luis, who was sitting in front of me, waiting. Let's go. When we reached the entrance to the apartment complex, Luis glanced around the empty space and hesitantly asked, "Is the delivery guy not here yet?" I blinked. I made that up. He nodded thoughtfully. As the elevator arrived at my door, I flashed a bright smile at Luis. "Thanks for dinner. Next time. It's my treat," he responded. All right. Late that night, Alex called several times. I simply turned my phone to airplane mode. Let the two of them keep fighting. When I woke up, it was nearly noon. I turned off airplane mode, feeling great as I saw 99 plus messages and a dozen missed calls. Before I could scroll through them all, Luis sent a new message. "Didn't you say you'd treat me to dinner yesterday? How about today? I'm out, and I can pick up some ingredients. We can make hot pot together." I quickly agreed. Sure, come over to my place later. After sending the message, I got up to wash my face. Just as I finished, there was a knock at the door. He came back so quickly. Thinking this, I hurried to the door, but it wasn't Luis standing there, it was Alex. The smile left my face as I coldly asked, "What are you doing here?" Alex's face was filled with anger. "Why didn't you tell me you were discharged from the hospital? I went there and only then found out." Chapter 6. We've already broken up. What obligation do I have to tell you anything? Alex slammed his hand against the wall. "Julia, can you stop making a scene? I was just busy with work and didn't have time to visit you." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms, scrutinizing him, trying to catch a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "Alex, is that all? How long have you and Eva been seeing each other?" For a moment, panic flashed across his face, but he quickly regained his temper. "I only saw her yesterday. I was just venting. Why do you have to be so suspicious? And calling her to say I bought you a pearl necklace, what was the point of that?" "Alex, I was the one at the restaurant that day." The moment I said that, Alex, who had been so aggressive just moments before, froze. His face turned red, then white. In an embarrassing display of emotions, he looked at me in disbelief. "You were following me?" Chapter 7. Faced with his baseless accusations, I laughed, too tired to explain. "Yeah, I followed you. Let's break up, and stop dragging this out." I grabbed the door handle, trying to close it, but he grabbed the edge of the door, his lips trembling. "Baby, I can't lose you." In the past, if I had seen him with red eyes, begging like this, I would have forgiven him no matter what mistake he had made. But now, I only felt disgust. I stood there quietly, wondering what kind of performance he'd put on next. Seeing I wasn't saying anything, Alex lowered his head, continuing to beg, "Baby, I only saw Eva that one time. I was just too lonely." Then he suddenly looked up at me, trying to grab my hand. but I dodged to the side. He awkwardly withdrew his hand. It was torture not being able to see you while you were in the hospital. Please, forgive me just this once? I stared at him coldly. Slap yourself. When I've had enough fun, I'll forgive you. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and didn't stop. As I watched his face swell and redden, I yawned. What a man, able to grovel when needed. Luis returned with the groceries, walked past Alex, wrapped his arms around my waist, and rested his head on my shoulder, marveling. Julia, your ex-boyfriend is really obedient. Alex stopped, his eyes darting between Luis and me. You moved on that fast? Before I could speak, Luis taunted him. Thanks for giving up your spot, ex-hubby. Realizing he'd been played, Alex's lips trembled in anger, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was full of rage. So, you moved on just like that, and I'm the one who cheated? Fine, we're even. If you send him away, we can pretend none of this ever happened. We can still be together. Ha! I sneered. Who wants to be with you? I slammed the door shut, and this time, Alex didn't block it. The commotion outside quickly died down, and I heard the elevator doors open and close as he headed downstairs. I turned to look at Luis, who had already let go of me. Thanks. I felt a rush of excitement. That felt great. Luis swallowed the words on the tip of his tongue and simply said, "You're welcome." I excitedly picked up the groceries for Luis and ran to the dining table, then rushed to the kitchen to grab the dishes and utensils. But as I dipped my food into the sauce, drops of fresh blood began falling into my bowl. Chapter 8. The bowl and chopsticks slipped from my hands, shattering on the floor, and oil splattered all over Luis and me. Instinctively, I covered my nose, fumbling across the table for tissues with my head tilted back. Luis handed me some. I stuffed them into my nose and wiped the blood from my face, not bothering with the oil stains, and collapsed onto the couch, looking at Luis's white shirt now stained orange. I gave him an apologetic look. I'm really sorry. Not only did I not treat you to dinner, but I also ruined your shirt. Luis smiled casually as he swept up the broken pieces on the floor. It's fine. It's just a shirt. We can have dinner another time. I forced a smile and leaned back on the couch, staring up at the ceiling, lost in thought. Doctor, how much longer do you think I have? 3 months at most. His voice was calm, though his knuckles turned white from gripping the broom too tightly. That's still a pretty long time. I mumbled. My eyelids fluttered, and I felt an unbearable tightness in my chest. Gasping for air, so tired, I turned on my side, clutching a pillow as I lay on the couch. I'm so sleepy. I'm going to take a nap. Don't bother sweeping. Take a break and head home whenever. There's food in the fridge. Help yourself. I'm really sorry, but I don't have the energy to move. Luis didn't say anything, and I didn't care. Drifting off to sleep, Julia's breathing gradually steadied, and Luis quietly approached her, his warm fingers brushing through her hair. Julia, I like you so much. His eyelids trembled, and his voice came out raspy and gentle. He lingered beside her for a moment before standing up, his steps both heavy and light as he walked to the door and closed it softly. In my days, I heard Luis's confession, but my eyelids felt so heavy, I couldn't open them, nor did I want to. I didn't want to think about anything anymore or deal with any relationships. I guess Luis knew I wasn't actually asleep. It felt like I had slept for a long time. When I woke up, my hands and feet were freezing, my clothes soaked with sweat, and the sky was just starting to darken. I fumbled for my phone and found a message from Luis. I quit my job. I want to take a break. How about we go to Japan together to watch the fireworks? Fireworks? I remembered mentioning to Alex once that when I got better, I wanted to go watch fireworks with him, but he had brushed me off at the time. Chapter 9. We'll see when I'm better. Another message popped up on my phone. You've been undergoing treatment for so long. Don't you want to get out and explore? If I really stayed home all the time, it would be such a waste. I replied. When do we leave? Since my mother passed away, I hadn't left this place. I truly wanted to get out and see the world. Tomorrow. Dr. Luis sent a quick reply. Okay. I pushed myself up from the couch and walked to my bedroom. I opened the nightstand drawer, where the brand new Japan visa sat on top. I had begged Alex for a week before my chemotherapy, and he finally went with me to apply for it. He probably never intended to go see the fireworks with me. Did he? The next day, after we boarded the plane, we arrived at Akita Airport in Japan in just a few hours. The entire trip, we didn't mention what had happened the day before. Almost as if by unspoken agreement. After lunch, we went to a kimono shop to buy yukatas. The shop owner, a kind elderly Japanese woman, watched us as we tried on the ones we liked. And she sighed. You two look so perfect together. You must be newlyweds, right? I was about to explain. Luis took my hand and smiled, answering, yes, we are. Once we left the store, I didn't ask him, why didn't you correct her? It wouldn't have changed anything. Either way, we continued walking to our next destination. Since the fireworks festival wasn't starting for a while, we first visited some popular tourist spots in the mountains. It wasn't until evening that we made our way to the foot of the mountain to watch the fireworks. The place was packed with people, couples and small groups, as a quiet breeze swept by, making the atmosphere peaceful and serene. As the fireworks exploded in the night sky, cheers erupted from the crowd. For some reason, I was overwhelmed with emotion, and tears quickly welled up in my eyes. I raised my phone to record the moment, wanting to remember it forever. Julia, I like you. Amid the noise of the crowd, I still heard Luis's words. I was stunned, looking at him in a daze. His gentle eyes reflected the sparks of the fireworks, full of tenderness. Those sparkling peach blossom eyes, they reminded me so much of 10-year-old Alex. A rush of warmth flooded my nose, and I quickly raised my hand to cover it, tilting my head back as drops of blood fell. Luis panicked and hurriedly pulled out tissues, wiping the blood for me. The tissues clogged the flow of blood. I looked up at the dazzling fireworks, feeling awkward as I spoke. If the blood dripped from my fingertips, clouded my vision, or even spurted from my mouth, it might seem poetic, but it just had to be a nosebleed. Luis didn't look at me, his gaze fixed on the fireworks above. Chapter 10. Beautiful no matter what. After the fireworks ended, we headed back to the hotel, packed our bags, and rushed to the airport. We didn't plan to see anything else. Because of that unfinished confession, things between Luis and me had become a bit awkward. It was already 2 a.m. when we got off the plane. And just as we got out of the airport and hailed a cab, I spotted Alex standing in front of us. It looked like he hadn't slept for a day and a night. His eyes bloodshot. The usually well-groomed Alex now had a circle of black stubble around his chin. He slowly approached me, his eyes filled with regret. Baby, it's really over with Eva this time. I took Luis's hand and walked right past him, getting into the taxi without saying a word. Alex watched the taxi drive away, his gaze lost and confused. In the car, I tried to let go of Luis's hand, but he held on tightly. Julia, this time, don't let go, okay? I kept my head down, but I could feel his intense gaze. Unable to look at him directly, I nodded. Okay. When we got out of the car, Luis and I went back to our respective homes. The only difference now, compared to before, was that we were together. After washing up, I collapsed into bed, and when I woke up, it was already dark again. I realized I was sleeping more and more. Want to go for a walk? Get some fresh air? After replying to Luis's good morning, I sent him the message. Sure. I got ready quickly, and Luis and I left the apartment complex for a walk. It was always nice to breathe in the cool night air. After we walked around for a bit and were about to head home, my phone rang. Eva, want to meet up? I'm at the restaurant below your apartment. Luis leaned over. Are you going? I nodded. Why don't you take the dishes upstairs first? Last time, I had broken a bowl, so while we were out shopping, we bought a few more. Seeing the worry in his eyes, I hugged him gently. Don't worry, I'll be up soon. After some thought, he agreed. Okay. I turned and walked toward the cafe. Eva was sitting in a spot where I could see her right away, staring directly at me. I sat down in front of her. Would you like something to drink? She greeted me. I didn't want to make small talk, so I declined. No, thanks. What is it you wanted to talk about? Her expression grew heavy. Julia, I broke up with Alex. Yeah, Alex told me. Eva's lips trembled, and after hesitating for a long time, she finally asked, "Did Alex really buy you that pearl necklace?" Chapter 11. I let out a laugh, looking at her innocently. Yeah, is that why you wanted to meet me? Her eyes suddenly turned vicious, and she quickly pulled her right hand out of her bag. In it was a sharp fruit knife, which she immediately thrust toward me. I stood there, frozen, not expecting to dodge, and the knife came down. "Watch out!" Alex shouted as he jumped in front of me. The people around us screamed, and chaos erupted. Blood gushed out of Alex's body, flowing endlessly like water. His eyes reddened again. "Julia, I'm so sorry." Alex was taken away in an ambulance, as Eva was being put into a police car. She screamed at me. Why? Why is it so easy for you to get everything I've ever wanted? Why does everyone love you? The police car drove away, but I remained standing there, unable to process what had just happened. When I finally looked up, I realized Luis had come down at some point and was standing beside me. "Why did you come down?" "I couldn't stop worrying about you." Alex died. He was stabbed in an artery and died before they even reached the hospital. Just like the curse he swore when he was 10 years old. "If I ever stop loving Julia, I'll die." When I heard that, I didn't talk to him for an entire day. That year, I found out I had throat cancer while I was in the hospital. I inherited it from my late mother. With the loss of my family and the weight of my illness, I lived in a daze for an entire month. Soon after, my abusive and unfaithful father passed away as well, following my mother, leaving me alone with a few properties. A young boy arrived at the hospital around that time. I heard he had broken his leg in a fight. His parents were migrant workers, far away, and he had no one to care for him. He was grumpy and rude to everyone. But when I was in unbearable pain, he would gruffly comfort me. "Stop crying." When I lost my hair from chemotherapy, he would furrow his brow and, blushing, say, "You look good." One day, I had my housekeeper buy a piece of jade, and I happily gave it to the boy. His face stiffened. "Men don't wear accessories." The smile that had been on my face dropped with his words, and my lips quivered as I started to cry. "Why are you being so mean?" For the first time, the boy's face softened, and he hurried to wipe away my tears. "Don't cry, Julia. Don't cry. I'm not mean anymore. I'll wear it." Chapter 12. As he spoke, he took the pendant and wore it around his neck. One day, when I woke up and went to look for the boy, I found his bed empty. The nurse told me he had left with his parents. That day, I was so angry I didn't eat anything. That little brat didn't even say goodbye. I cried again in my frustration, and to this day, I still don't know his real name. For the next 15 years, I never saw him again, until my first year of university, when I spotted the same jade pendant hanging around Alex's neck in the crowd. He was still the same as when he was a boy, tan skin and a fierce demeanor. We ended up together. I always felt like something about him was different from when we were kids, but I was in love with that 10-year-old boy. Side story, Luis chapter. The day Julia died, Luis felt both hot and cold all over. His body was burning with excitement, while a chill spread from his heart, like he was caught between fire and ice. Feeling like he was floating, it was as if he suddenly had a fever. But it was just that, a fever. When he was 10 years old, his parents rushed to the hospital late at night to take him away. His grandmother was dying and wanted to see him one last time. Luis wanted to say goodbye to Julia, but no one listened to him, and somewhere along the way, he lost the jade pendant. He felt guilty for days. After leaving, Luis' skin became fairer. He had once dreamed of becoming a basketball star, but now his dreams had changed. "I want to be a doctor, so I can cure Julia." That was what Luis thought. Luis eventually did help treat Julia, but deep down, he knew she couldn't be cured. He wanted to ask Julia if she remembered him, but after losing the jade, he couldn't bring himself to ask, fearing she would cry and blame him again, until the day Julia died. He never had the courage to ask if she remembered him. He figured she must have forgotten him long ago. Otherwise, how could she have fallen in love with a jerk like Alex? As a child, she had once said she was going to marry Alex. Standing in front of Julia's tombstone, Louise couldn't understand how she could have loved someone like Alex. On this sunny day, rain poured in Louise's heart.